Okay, so we're now live. Welcome to today's meeting of the Adults and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. If we could just move to the first item, which is the appointment of the chairman. Could I confirm that Mr. Richardson was nominated as chairman-elect to the Adults and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee at the County Council meeting held on the 8th of July 2020, and ask that the committee confirm that this is agreed?
Yes, agreed.
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 Okay, it's a few hands there. If I could have a formal seconder.
Yes, I'll
I'll
second.
it.
That's great, thank you. So over to you, Mr. Richardson.
Delayed action on the mic. Thank you, Lauren. Right, welcome everybody to today's meeting of the Adults and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. This meeting is being broadcast live via the county's website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Due to the current situation, all members of the committee and officers presenting today are joining online. Can I please ask that all officers and members mute their microphone until they wish or are invited to speak, and if you're able to use your video camera, to please turn it on for the duration of the meeting. If members and officers wish to speak, please ensure that you now use the raise hand function and not the chat facility. Although I do appreciate for those that are having to join by the phone due to connection problems, you might just have to push your way in and let us know that you wish to speak. Before we begin, I will now ask members to introduce themselves. We have one substitute today, but I'll go round the members and ask them to introduce themselves. So first of all, Mrs. Broadley. Mrs. Broadley, are you there? Mrs. Broadley, I have you on mute. Could you unmute and introduce yourself, please? Right, I'll move on to Mr. Crooks and come back to Mrs. Broadley.
Morning, Chairman. Yes, I'm here.
Would you introduce yourself to the public? Let them know which division you stand for.
Bill Crooks, Mallory Division.
Thank you, Mr. Crooks. Next we go to Mr. Gillard.
Morning, Chairman. Congratulations on your appointment. My name is Tony Gillard and I represent the Whittick Division.
Right, thank you, Tony. Next we go to Mr. Harrison.
Yes, good morning, Chairman. My name's Dan Harrison and I represent Ibstock and Appleby.
Thank you, Dan. Then we go to Mr. Poland.
Hello there, everyone. I'm James Poland, Syston Foss Division. Just to let you know, I'm having potentially a few issues with my internet, so if it suddenly go really slow, it's probably that rather than anything else. So,
then can we go to Mr. Sheehan?
Sean Sheehan, Forest and Measham Division, substituting for Joel Mayer.
Then we go to Mrs. Amanda Wright. Amanda, are you there?
Hello, did you hear that?
No, we didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. No, Amanda Wright, Burbage Division.
Thank you, Amanda. And then can we go to Mrs. Maggie Wright?
Good morning, Maggie Wright for the Stony Stanton and Croft Division.
Thank you, Maggie. We're also joined today by the portfolio holder and the cabinet support member for adults and communities. Could I ask them to introduce themselves, starting with Richard?
Morning, Chair. Richard Blunt, Division 4, Kirby Muxloe, Leicester Forest East and Glenfield, portfolio holder for adult social care.
Thank you, Richard. And could I go to Christine?
Christine Radford here, County Councillor for Shepshed and Richard's support.
Right, thank you all. That's all the introductions done, unless Mrs. Broadley has managed to unmute.
I have. Apologies, I was struggling to get unmuted. Linda Broadley, representing Wigston North.
Right, thank you, Linda. Sorry,
Excuse
Linda.
me, Chair. Sorry. just to say we've got Mukesh Barrotts from Health Watch as well. Just he's just joined us. Just to let you know.
Yeah, welcome, Mukesh. Right, we're now moving on to, sorry.
That's all right. Good morning. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item 2, which is the election of the vice chairman. Could I please ask for a nomination, please?
I nominate Mr. Dan Harrison, Chair.
Do I have a second of that motion?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Poland. Are we all in favour?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Any to the contrary? Right, thank you all. Could I please ask those that haven't muted their microphones to do so, just to make sure we don't get any feedback, etc. That's great. We now move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of March 2020. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of March 2020 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is everybody in agreement, or do I have any dissenters? No, it looks like everybody's in agreement, so thank you very much. Agenda item 4 is question time. I've received no questions from members of the public. Agenda item 5 is questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. I've received no questions from members. Agenda item 6 is to advise of any other items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent not elsewhere on the agenda. I've not been notified of any urgent items. Agenda item 7, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. We always at these meetings take it as standard that for those dual-hatted members that we make a note of those members who are also members of district councils. Does anyone else have a declaration of interest they wish to make? And if you can use the hands up facility if you do. Right, in the absence of any hands up, I take that as a no.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, I pressed my hand up and it's not obviously coming up on your screen. A declaration that my wife is in receipt of help and support for vascular dementia. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Right, so agenda item 8 is declarations of the party whip in accordance with Overview and Scrutiny Procedure Rule 16. I've got nothing from the party whip that I'm aware of, or the party whips. Anyone know to the contrary? That's fine, thank you. Presentation of petitions under Standing Order 36. We have no petitions have been received. Before we move on to consider the substantive items on the agenda today, as a reminder, can I please ask members to allow officers to present their full report before seeking to ask questions. As we are all joining online, to ensure everyone has an opportunity to speak, I propose once the officers have finished presenting the item, I will then open up for questions. To indicate you have a question, please use the hands raised option and I will call upon you one at a time. I won't guarantee that I call you in the order you put your hands up because all I can see is who's got a hand up. Mr. Harrison, your hand is currently up, so you may wish to lower it.
I have.
It was still showing us up on my screen. Anyway, we'll move on to agenda item 10, which is the first item on today's agenda, is the COVID-19 recovery update, which is set out on pages 11 to 34 of the agenda pack. And could I please invite John Wilson to present the report?
Thank you, Chair. As members will note, the department supplied a number of reports through the summer to committee members on the impact of COVID and the effect of COVID on the department services. Much of those reports are summarised within the first half of today's report, and I don't intend to go back over that information, but obviously I am happy to answer any questions that members of the committee may have on that. But if I could take members through to paragraph 74 of today's report, I'll start to detail the recovery strategy of the department in respect to the coronavirus pandemic. So as you would anticipate and expect, the department is working very much aligned to the corporate recovery strategy, but also to the recovery strategy of our key partners in the NHS, the district councils and other organisations. We have set up a departmental recovery steering group, which consists of all senior managers in the department to oversee the recovery planning, and we've identified a number of opportunities and changes to practice and to service delivery that we might want to pursue in the future in respect to the impact of COVID. That's both in terms of developing new ways of delivering services, but also ensuring that the department is resilient to any further surges of the pandemic that may come forward in the future. So on page 21 of the report, we highlight where some of those changes are taking place. 113 changes have been highlighted, and we have a log and a tracker that's checking against all those, and we have a process by which we are assessing all of those changes and making decisions as to how we might want to go forward. And today's report is really to highlight some of the areas of impact, significant impact, and where we'll be making particular changes to practice that committee might want to be aware of. We've had a number of engagement sessions with staff across the department, from frontline through to the departmental management team, so that we have tried to capture the experience of the whole of the department and ensure that we are bringing forward suggestions and recommendations that make sense both in terms of strategic delivery but also operational practice. So there's a number of changes that, as you'd imagine, at a service-wide level. Paragraphs 89 to 94 highlight some of those areas at a high level, changes to the ways of working, working practices, virtual working, the digital offer, the use of PPE, except all the things you would expect to see across the piece, whichever service area we're in. But specifically, as we go into the specific areas of actions that we might want to consider, one or two I'll pick out for committee. At the bottom of page 23, we start to outline new hospital discharge pathways. Members of committee may be aware that in March of this year, when the pandemic first hit, a whole new series of pathways were developed to ensure that people could be discharged from hospital quickly and efficiently, and to ensure that hospital beds could be freed up, quite rightly, to ensure that we had the capacity to deliver services to people who may have the coronavirus. Those pathways meant that people who were being discharged from hospital at that time, any new packages of care or any additional packages of care that people had, would be paid for by the NHS. That has been in place up until the 31st of August, and from the 1st of September, slightly amended new guidance has come through, which consolidates on that original guidance, but limits the NHS funding commitment to the first 6 weeks. So from the 1st of September, we continue to discharge people as efficiently as possible. The assessment process, most people who would have previously had an assessment in hospital prior to discharge will now have the assessment at home. So this pathway is called Discharge To Assess. And the reason it's called that is that we discharge people and then we assess them in their own homes, in their own environments, which is often better for people than being assessed in a hospital bed. The NHS will pick up to the first 6 weeks, and then move to is the responsibility of the NHS, the local council, or whether people are in fact self-funders. So that's a major change, and as you can imagine, that means quite a lot of resource changes, quite a lot of planning around new pathways of care, and ensuring that we've got the right services in the right place for people on discharge. Moving down through the report, there's been significant impact on working age adults, be they people with disabilities or people with mental health needs, particularly where they received services in the community. So where we were providing people with support to enable them to access the community or to improve their socialisation or daily living skills. Obviously, quite a lot of that work has had to be put on hold due to social distancing and other issues. But we are now beginning to bring those services back up online, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a minute. One of the areas of practice that wasn't impacted by legislation or policy was safeguarding. So safeguarding and deprivation of liberties, as we went into the pandemic, the legislation remained in place, so the requirements and the responsibilities remained in place. But of course, the practice had to change. So much of the assessment work in this area had to be done virtually. So if you think about deprivation of liberties, for example, where we might have been going into care homes to assess people, we were not able to do that. So we had to do that virtually, but we are now beginning to think about how we can bring some of those areas of practice back into a face-to-face situation, albeit with relevant PPE in place. Thinking about our commissioned services, clearly the biggest impact of COVID has been on the provider services, largely the domiciliary care and residential care services. Domiciliary care services have proved to be incredibly resilient. We've maintained our domiciliary care offer and actually probably improved our domiciliary care offer throughout this period. And that's in with the basis that actually we have more people now receiving domiciliary care than we had at the start of the process. So there's been quite a large increase in numbers of people receiving domiciliary care. But the agencies have managed to keep that capacity and managed to ensure that people continue to receive the services they need. I'll come on to residential care in a second. A third area of major impact has been on our community life choices. So these are services that we provide to people during the day, largely, and sometimes in the evenings. Services that are often building based, where people receive services alongside others. And of course, all of those services had to close as part of the COVID response. A number of people were receiving online services, digital services, telephone support. People have been receiving support in different ways, but it's certainly not the level of support that they would have been receiving prior to the COVID pandemic. And that's had a major impact on both individuals, but also on families providing support to people. We have around 1,200 people who access that support. We're now in a process of reviewing all 1,200 to determine what their needs are going forward and the best way to provide those services. I'm working with providers and with families to ensure that people get the services they need. But this has been an area where there has been a major change to the service delivery. And it's an area that we need to ensure that we focus on over the next 2 to 3 months to ensure that people have the support they require. Members will have seen a lot in the news and in the press, and we've provided a number of briefings for members around care home support. And this is obviously, the care homes have been heavily impacted by COVID and the people who live in care homes. So whilst supporting care homes on a daily basis, and we have continued to be in contact with care homes on a daily basis, on a regular basis, we also have weekly teleconferences with all providers, and we've supplied nearly 40 bulletins of information to providers to ensure that they've got the most up-to-date guidance and information available to them. Clearly, one of the big issues has been on occupancy levels and will be going forward. So we know that currently occupancy levels across the county are around about 81%. And we are undertaking some work with the sector to look at what the impact of that might be in the longer term. And we're intending to bring a report back to committee in November, a detailed report on the care home sector for a conversation with committee. We have a wealth of information on the ability of care homes to undertake self-isolation, to cohort staff. We know care homes' PPE status. We've got a number of information around testing in care homes. So we probably know more about working care homes than we ever did. But obviously, that's still an area that we think requires a major focus going forward. And and certainly in terms of the future sustainability of the market. In terms of adult social care finance, it's probably worth just picking up that, of course, going back to the discharge guidance, because people were being funded through the NHS on discharge from hospital, large numbers of people over the last 6 months haven't been charged for services. But we are now in the process of looking at that and reviewing those people, and we will be undertaking assessments of people's financial affairs in order that we can determine who requires council-funded services going forward and what contributions they may need to make to those. So that's a piece of work that's going to be taking place over the next few weeks. I won't go through the detail. I mean, obviously, there's lots of changes to things like induction and recruitment, and it's all being done virtually now, but I won't go into the detail of that. Lots of changes to the way that we deliver services and the business support functions and the functions that support services, particularly moving to digital and online services, and the fact that the vast majority of our staff now are working from home, working virtually. Just going on to paragraph 142, to the communities and wellbeing services. I'll just pick up that, as members will be aware, we have reopened our libraries on a managed basis. So we have a click and collect service in our libraries, and we also have a browser service, a virtual browser service. Probably worth saying that we've had 5,500 hits on the browser service and over 1,600 orders placed on the click and collect. So that's proved very successful. People are making good use of that service, and we're looking to extend the hours that that's available to people this week. From this week also, our museums and heritage services will reopen. So starting today, in fact, Bosworth Battlefield will be reopening, and that'll be followed by the museums at Melton and Harborough this week. The museums at Charnwood was already open. That's being because the front of house there is done by Charnwood Borough Council. I think that's already open. So we're starting to reopen all of our services. The record office will follow in October, and our adult learning services are also recommencing this week, albeit that numbers of learners are probably about 50% of what we'd normally expect, but we are beginning to start those courses now, including classroom courses for things like English and maths. So that starts again this week. I think I'll leave it there, Chair, if that's okay.
That's fine. Thank you, John. We're now opening it up to members' questions. If you please raise your hand if you wish to speak. All right, the first one I see is Mr. Crooks.
Thank you, Chairman. Just really a bit more information on the care at home. Is that to decide what financial care they need, or is that to decide on what type of health care they need? Because I just wondered what the lag time would be on that, because it could be dangerous if somebody needs medical care and there's a 2 or 3 day wait. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Crooks. Yes, actually, it's both of those things. So the first conversation that we will have with people is to determine the level of need that they have. We'll undertake a joint assessment with our health colleagues to determine whether or not anybody might be subject to continuing health care. And if a person has a high level of needs that would require continued healthcare involvement, then the NHS will take responsibility for that and will both provide the care and fund the care. Where that's not the case, that would then become a local authority responsibility. And in those circumstances, we would then undertake a financial assessment to determine whether the person should make a contribution to their care, is a self-funder, or whether the council would meet the full requirements of their care in the normal way that we would normally do. So both of those elements, the first element is to determine whether it's health or social care, and then the second element is to determine whether the person should make a contribution.
Thank you, John. Do you wish to come back, Mr. Crooks?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just on the timing of that, I don't think Mr. Wilson gave me an indication on whether that's going to be 2 or 3 days or they're going to do it the next day, sort of thing. It worries me that somebody's sent home that needs care and they're not going to get it for a couple of days. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, right, I missed that point. So what we're doing is we're developing what we call, on what's being called nationally, Home First services. So they're services that take people on discharge and immediately provide care, and whilst we undertake those assessments. And it might be that following those assessments, once the assessments are completed, then the person will be directed into whether it's a home care service or a reablement service or a residential care service or the correct service for the individual. But initially on discharge, there will be a health and social care Home First service. That's an integrated service that's there for at least 72 hours whilst those assessments are undertaken.
Right, thank you, John. Mr. Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could ask John, I obviously welcome the thought of the report in November looking at our care homes, because I have a personal concern about some of those that won't withstand what's happening to them at the moment, i.e. in the low numbers. But I think your report in November I'll have to wait till November to sort of get the gist of that, and I'm very happy for that. I'm also would like the point to make the point on PPE and winter flu. These are things, the winter flu is the normal, but obviously it's all mixed up with something perhaps even more awful. But will we have sufficient supplies of PPE? Because, it's going to be everybody demanding it. It's just a colossal demand on that provision across that entire country. When I read the figures about how many people, areas were in receipt, there was about 220 area hospitals, regional groups, and then it came out at, 80, 90,000 destinations that required it to be done. So, it is a massive demand, and will we have the provision and be aware of this and ready? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Harrison. We've no reason to believe at the moment that PPE is going to be a significant issue. I think we have been, we've managed the PPE situation well in Leicestershire since the start of the pandemic. We haven't had any major shortages. The current situation, and all care homes and domiciliary care providers report on a weekly basis on their PPE position. So we know on a weekly basis, and sometimes more than weekly, what their position is. And how much supply they've got and where they may be requiring additional support. As a council, we've put in place a new procurement strategy and group corporately around PPE. So we now have much better supply and much better oversight of our supply than we've ever had. We believe that the national PPE supply lines are now much more stable than they were. And that seems to be borne out by providers being able to access PPE. So we think that we will be okay, but obviously it is something that we will continue to monitor.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, John. Mrs. Maggie Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for a very comprehensive report and interesting reading. I seem to remember when I was reading, there was some part about the light bulb service and when that would start to come back for aids and adaptations within people's own homes. I know it's a difficult situation, but I think if people are waiting for a vital piece of equipment or an aid, it's very, priority for them. And I'm just wondering when that's likely to start again.
Okay, I think actually the light bulb service is beginning to come back up to speed, as it were. I'm not sure that it ever fully. I wouldn't say that the light bulb service was sort of fully non-functional. So we were still undertaking assessments, certainly. We were still undertaking some work with people, but obviously work in people's own homes was limited, and certainly some of the adaptations were limited because we wouldn't do anything that wasn't urgent and essential. Certainly, I think that we are now beginning to have those conversations and we are beginning to bring those services back up online. There may well be some waiting period, obviously, as we go through and we'll have to assess each case in terms of its priority and its importance. But certainly the services around the light bulb service, one of the things that perhaps took a backseat was some of the MOT work, the precautionary and prevention work, which we'll perhaps have to think about how we do that going forward.
Thank you, John. Has anyone else got any questions? Before we move on then, John, during the chairman's briefing this morning, and I think it's worth having on notice, we just asked about the health and well-being, which I think is crucially important to us of our staff. Would you just like to give the members an update on how you see our staff coping with this?
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you for the question as well. We have had a whole series of changes for staff. So the whole way that staff work has changed. We've gone from having staff who were 95% in offices to 95% at home. We've got staff working in with equipment that they'd not worked with before, digital equipment that perhaps they wouldn't have worked with previously. That's been a significant change for them. Connections, obviously, with other people and with their colleagues has been limited to virtual contact. And when you're working in people services, actually having that ability to sort of meet with your colleagues and work and bounce ideas off colleagues and check out and reflect is quite important to get that support back from colleagues. So that's been very difficult. We've had lots of staff who have been working very long hours. We've had staff who have been working 7-day weeks who wouldn't normally, and that's had a big impact on both them and their families. You know, we're extremely grateful for the support that staff have given us. And we've had lots of staff working in redeployed areas. So over 100 and odd staff working have been redeployed into areas that they wouldn't normally be working in. So our ability to manage the pandemic and our ability to manage the impact of the pandemic, both on for individuals and for the council, has been absolutely down to the hard work, the commitment, the dedication of staff. There's absolutely no two ways about that. And it has been humbling in many ways, actually, the amount of work that staff have managed to undertake. We are now in a process whereby we are beginning to get staff back into their substantive roles. So a lot of staff who were redeployed are beginning to go back into their original posts. There are still a number of staff who are still redeployed and are doing an exceptional job working in different ways with people. It's been very tiring for staff, I think. I think staff, have felt, quite tired at times. So we're trying wherever we can to get staff to be able to take leave and to recharge and to re-energize. I think across the board, you can't really say enough about the way that staff have managed this situation and have kind of just gone the extra mile, really, and have volunteered above and beyond. But yeah, absolutely, the impact on staff has been great, and it will continue to be. So as we come out of this situation, we will obviously, all those things I just talked about in terms of new pathways of care and new ways of working, and the need to kind of think about our resource base. So there will still be significant change over the next 12 months, I would imagine. And so this isn't going away anytime soon.
Right, thank you for that, John. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of all the committee. Could I ask the fact to be minuted that we put on record our thanks to everything our staff have done during this very difficult time, and the fact that they are putting their customers at the front and centre of everything they do. I think it's sometimes not recognised how difficult it's been, not just from the receivers of the service, but also for those trying to give it, and the professionalism they like to show when doing that. So if we could put that on record. Right, so I think we note the report and thank John for it. We're now moving on to agenda item 11, which is the Adults Communities Department Strategy 2020 to 2024, Delivering Wellbeing and Opportunity in Leicestershire, which is pages 35 to 72 in your report, and will be presented by Sandy McMillan.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you, Sandy.
Oh, that's good. So I'm just going to give quite a brief introduction to the report. I'm aware that there are quite a number of newer members of the committee. So I'm just aware that some people might be quite familiar with the work that's been done on the strategy, and some less so. So this has been to this committee a number of times previously, and we embarked on public consultation on a draft strategy in December last year, and that was due to have ended in March. So this is on our 4-year strategy. We extended that consultation to the end of July in order to give people time to respond, given the circumstances that were around at that time to do with COVID. We had 61 responses to the strategy. And there was also a range of other engagement that we had with stakeholders and talking to people in groups. And I think the key themes are summarised in paragraph 10 of part A of the report. And there's a detailed outline of the consultation feedback on the strategy in Appendix B, and the actual draft strategy is attached as Appendix A. The version that's with the committee papers online is the final version that's been formatted to make it more accessible than the version I think that was circulated with the papers. I think overall there was a lot of support for the strategy. I think the key themes were very much welcomed by stakeholders, by service users, by carers, and we got some really helpful comments really about what the implementation approach should be. I think the comments are very much about, well, this is fine, but how are you actually going to deliver these things? And that's where the feedback I think we got on the strategy was particularly helpful. What we've also done with the version that's with you today is we've considered the impacts of COVID on the delivery of the strategy. So I don't think there's anything about what's happened in the COVID period that fundamentally changes what we're aiming to do with the strategy around promoting well-being and increasing levels of satisfaction with services. I think all those things still stand, and the strategy doesn't need to be fundamentally reviewed. But again, the implementation approach is going to have to take into account all the things that we've learned and changed during the COVID period. The reports and the draft strategy is due to go to Cabinet on the 18th of September. So the committee's obviously invited now to consider the revised draft strategy and the outcome of the consultation, and consider what comments you might want to make to Cabinet when it goes there on the 18th of September. Also online we've got Kate Revel, who's the head of service, who's able to also take questions. So I'm happy to take any questions now. And also John may also want to take some questions too. So thank you for that.
Right, thank you, Sandy. So it's over to you, members. Does anyone want to go first? I'm showing absolutely no hands up to speak. Oh, sorry, Dan. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Sandy. First of all, I'd like to say congratulations. What a very good document that you've produced. I think it's first class. My comments, some of the items that you've mentioned, the balance between price and quality, that's forever. Resource, obviously, reference our staff, how important that is, and I think that's well accepted. And obviously, finance is the other one that comes in that haunts us all forever. But I'd like to particularly praise for those people who allowed their stories to be told, and the initiative that you and your team took, because that really opens up a storyline now. We on this scrutiny panel and board are able to see in depth where we never would before. We just get a sort of outside story, but now we're really being able to understand it a lot more. So congratulations and well done for my part. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I think in the absence of anyone else wishing to ask questions, I'd echo what Dan says. I think in my time on this committee, I think one of the quantum leap forwards has been bringing the reports to life with individual stories. And I think that means that when these documents are published, they mean a lot more to members of the public, because rather than just words, it's a question of there's some scenarios there which could affect any of either us or our friends, family and relatives. So I'd echo that comment. So I think for those that have been on this committee a while, we have looked at this report on several occasions. We have made comments. I think the report has been changed because of those comments. And in the absence of any comments to the contrary, I think the recommendation would be that this goes to Cabinet and that they approve it and put this into the public domain as soon as possible.
Yeah.
I'm seeing lots of nods, so I think I've probably got that right. So thank you for that, Sandy. You got off lightly, but I think it's only because of all the work you've done on this over the past year or 18 months. So sorry we didn't have any difficult or challenging questions for you all, but I think it speaks volumes of the way that this committee has worked with officers over, the last 18 months to get the report to the stage it has. So thank you. We now move on. Thank you, Sandy. We now move on to agenda item 12, which is the status on support for community managed libraries. It's pages 73 to 80 in your pack, and it's in the very capable hands of Nigel Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Hope everybody can see and hear me.
We can see, Nigel, thank you.
Okay, so this short report really looks at the impact of COVID on community managed libraries, and proposes, this report will go to Cabinet further on, a small amendment to the existing support package available to them. I should say that throughout the COVID period, contact's been maintained with community managed libraries and their trustee boards through two methods. One has been through ongoing contact through 3 FTE library support officers in our new structure. And also I've been chairing a small focus group of representative trustees to talk with them about the challenges that they're facing or have faced. I'm not going to cover the previous decisions other than to say that paragraph 2 reminds members of the library service model, which was agreed now back in 2014, so quite a while now. And also paragraph 4, the Cabinet agreeing a process should a community managed library decide that it's no longer able to continue, and that process would still be in place. Luckily, so far we've not been able to utilise those processes. When we originally planned this report, we'd really got an eye on the fact that next year, the financial support element of the package, agreed back in 2014, will begin to reach its conclusions next year, with the first libraries to transition to community ownership, seeing the end of that support package. And just to remind people that this was a tapered package which reduced by 20% each year from us supporting with 100% of the running costs, and by next year those early ones will look at a nil, where they will not be receiving the running costs from the county. But there is a contingency fund, which I'll cover shortly later on. Paragraph 13 outlines reminds people of the baseline level of support to community managed libraries, and this will continue in terms of ongoing provision of book stock, which remains the property of the county, access to the library computer system, which enables people to take out and return books, and ICT equipment, unless a community managed library is requested to use its own ICT services, and continued support and training and assistance by community support officers, and an operational call hub which assists with any operational issues. And also we have a contract with Voluntary Action Leicestershire to provide more specialist advice around the process of managing a voluntary organisation, and that will continue. Paragraph 14 just outlines that support package, but 15 just details the fact that when we set up the original package, there was a contingency fund established to assist any community group in the event of any emergency unanticipated activity, like a roof collapsing or a boiler failure. And also this was supported in addition where to mitigate any of those libraries that might have been affected by other county council decisions. So an example of that was when there was a review of children's centres, and they were relying on income from a children's centre, and that wasn't able to progress because of decisions made around that. And the fund has also been supplemented as resources have become available. So the sale of Castle Donington Library, because they moved to other premises, and that contingency fund currently stands still at a relatively healthy £280,000. In between all of that planning and so forth, the pandemic hit, and the main, and like all other libraries, as you're aware, we had to suspend services, shifting as much as we can or could to online services. But the main area where it's impacted on community managed libraries has been their ability to generate income, because that was mainly done through letting premises for other organisations' events. Some have used coffee shops, room hire activities, and so on. And that the COVID has meant that for that period of time, and probably for the short period of time going into the future, they're not going to be a raised revenue through that way. And the other issue was it was just really unknown, and still remains really unknown in terms of the recruitment and retention of volunteers, many of whom are older people, and may have been impacted or worried about the impact of the virus, particularly when coming back to volunteer. So we did undertake a small piece of support work in that we used the council's corporate property steering group agreed that the contingency fund could be used just to provide a small cushion of an additional 20% contribution to running costs, which is detailed in paragraph 18. And what this meant is that, the final year when they were at 20% of their running costs, we've funded an additional 20%. So it's given them an additional cushion of that. And the details of that are there in paragraph 18. In terms of the longer term view and going back to that original piece of work where we were looking to next year where the funding package begins to wind down, trying to understand where the main challenges and issues are. And paragraph 19 onwards begins to just outline that. So by talking to community managed libraries through their annual reports, and which we undertake with them on an annual basis, but ongoing contact and work through our support officers. The summary really is that obviously community groups are worried about the medium-term sustainability in terms of groups, particularly beyond 2022. There's still worries around just the challenges of ongoing maintenance and repair of the property assets, and ongoing challenges as ever, and I think in the voluntary sector widely, with the recruitment and retention of new trustees and volunteers. Nothing too surprising in those things, I think. But we did undertake in paragraph 21 a high-level review of the financial status of each of the community managed libraries, and we're confident really that they do have sufficient reserves to sustain services throughout next year. But we will need to keep an ongoing link and contact with them, because they may face financial challenges from 22 onwards. And clearly COVID has affected their ability to continue with income streams since March of this year. We've also supported the groups to apply for available tourism, leisure and hospitality government grants, and 19 of the 30 odd libraries that were transferred have been successful. And the value of those grants for each of those libraries has ranged from around £10,000 to £25,000, which has been a good boost in terms of providing that much value. We've maintained and enhanced the officer support within the Communities and Wellbeing Service where libraries sit, and by the creation of an additional support officer post. So we currently had up until July this year 2 community managed library support officer posts, and we've increased that to 3 as part of our normal structure going forward, and also as part of the structure. An audience, what we're calling an audience participation team, and partly funded through the Improve Better Care Fund until early next year. The original intention of this was that the work, and that work has a commissioning fund, which we would actually support community managed libraries by commissioning them to undertake work associated with supporting people's well-being, very much linked to the strategy which Sandy's outlined earlier on today. But clearly there's challenges with COVID, because obviously a lot of, when we were setting this up, we were thinking that these were going to be sessions within libraries and so forth. That, you know, sort of as the impact of COVID has meant that we are trying to support as much as we can with that team virtually. So we're unclear at the moment as to how that will progress, but we're keeping a close monitoring look on that. And one of the main change, I think, which brings us to, you know, sort of what we'll be recommending going forward is that we will be recommending that one of the issues that became apparent through lessons learned of the whole project was that when the community managed libraries were set up, they were given a 10-year lease with the county council, and as those leases reduced, we had in place an option for them to renew their lease on a 5-yearly basis. But clearly, I think what we found is that has been difficult for them, not least because every time they do it, it incurs legal and surveyors fees, which impacts obviously on their income. But also very clearly that, you know, a lot of community managed libraries apply for external funding. And it's a requirement for a lot of voluntary groups that they have to prove that they have, you know, sort of medium term, you know, 10-year sustainability in terms of lease arrangements. So the main change that we're going to make in terms of that baseline offer is to change that, you know, sort of ongoing renewal every 5 years just to a 10-year lease. Paragraph 29, I wonder, was just looks at some options that we've looked at in terms of possible things that we could do to support them in the medium term. Option 1, just as I've said, scaling up that baseline offer to include the lease extension to 10 years from 5 years. And we have already, through our structure, increased officer support for them. And we'll regularly review that contingency fund as well to reassure and support community managed libraries if there's any sort of potential costly building repairs. Option 2 was to use that upscale in option 1, but to offer all libraries internal repairing only leases. But I didn't think we felt that that wasn't going to be particularly viable ongoing. And option 3 was to upscale the baseline as in option 1, but actually to take back control of all of the running costs for community managed library buildings. So we felt that, again, that would have a significant recurring additional cost for around £200,000 a year for us, which in the financial climate because of COVID, etc., we found is not really going to be financially sustainable. But in terms of overall resources, the amendment of the 10-year lease and the officer support is contained within our existing budgets, and our strategic property services colleagues have confirmed that that 10-year lease extension is manageable and a sufficient resource in place to manage that process when it comes to that. So in conclusion, broadly, we community managed libraries we've confidence that they can maintain services and a contribution to make to their local communities next year. What we'll propose to do is to review and continue to ongoing review, and if there are any particular issues or medium-term concerns throughout next year, no doubt we'll potentially be bringing another report back to this committee and then to Cabinet with further options going forward. So that is the report.
Thank you, Nigel. Now, the first hand I saw go up was Mr. Sheehan, who I think may have dropped out again and be on the telephone. Are you there, Sean?
I'm still here. The computer keeps dropping out, but the phone lines.
We can hear you, Sean, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, hello, Nigel. I seem to keep popping up whenever libraries comes on the agenda. I don't know why that is. Anyway, as you know, I've been keeping an eye on this ever since we started looking at these community libraries. It is a very concerning situation at the moment, with the expected end of the tapered financial support package coinciding with loss of income due to COVID, which will also potentially impact on the volunteer base and cause some libraries to use up their reserves in 21-22. So I can see what you're doing with the £58,000 grant, equivalent to 20% of the running costs in 2020-21. But I'm just wondering if we can look at what support we might need to give in 21-22. I mean, if you were to hold the current level of the financial support package, in other words, if it's year 4 now, keep it year 4 next year, do you see what I mean? How far would that go to helping them?
I think it would be very, very difficult to, without sort of looking individually at each of their financial circumstances. Obviously, they're all slightly different with each other. Some, sort of their existing reserves, etc., are very, very healthy, and they would be able to continue for a number of years before looking at alternative actions. It's very difficult at the moment to undertake that. We did look at. I think the 58k that we've allocated gives them that year cushion. And I think what we propose to do is, as I've said, review that. Just going back to the question about how we can further support them next year, the Adults and Communities strategy really has well-being at sort of the very core of its strategy. And I think, as we've sort of alluded to in the audience development team in the report, hopefully will open up some potential opportunities to support them for projects that will add to sort of their income. So it might be, for example, that we in effect commission sort of those community managed libraries that want to participate with running events that would contribute to things like the prevention part of the strategy. And by doing that, then it gives them potentially income streams going forward. But I think so we will continue to have to monitor the process quite closely next year, particularly as we're uncertain in terms of the progress that the pandemic makes, and sort of possibly look at additional options going forward.
Yeah, can I just say,
Sean, do you wish to come back?
In response, I think it's important to be proactive in terms of any support that we're giving and to start looking now at 21-22, because if people see that their income base is going to disintegrate, the risk is that with them being volunteers, they'll just walk away. They won't want to have it on their hands that the libraries had to close. So we need to be ready to support them when it's needed. And I think sooner rather than later is the way to go about it.
Yeah, and that was the original intention of this report, looking at next year. We know that next year, 21-22, they're going to be fairly sustainable, and they've got sufficient funds to maintain. It's 22-23 we'll need to undertake this work next year, just to keep that that proactivity sooner rather than later in terms of looking at what other potential options there might be.
Thank you, Nigel. We're now on to Mr. Crooks.
Thank you, Chairman. A general question. I think Nigel's covered quite a bit of it, and that was my concerns over the repair situation for libraries, the community libraries. Newbolt's got a particularly new library, but even so, the boiler packed up, and it's quite a chunk of money that was. And of course, the fundraising's stopped because the library's been shut for several months. It's just opening up again now, so all that's gone. So I welcome the one-off grant, which will help them considerably. But I'm trying to look in the future. This is a really good facility in Newbold. It's a lovely library, and a lot of local people use it for all sorts of things. So I would hate to see it have to go under because they couldn't afford to repair the roof or something like that. But I think Mr. Thomas has covered some of that. They're going to look at that. But then the local issue, more local to me, is it talks on page 74 about the library bus in Barwell. And I welcome that. But the problem we've got with the library bus in Barwell, it only comes to one spot, and that's in the centre outside the church. I have contacted the library service to see if that could be expanded. The reason being is that, as some of you members will know, Barwell's quite a big place. It's almost a small town. A lot of the residents that use the library bus are elderly. And if they live out on the outskirts, to walk right into the centre to the church and then walk back again is not an easy deal. And the other problem they've got is that a lot of these people of that sort of age are not online, so that's not an answer either. I wonder whether if it could be looked at again. I think it was looked at some time ago for me, but if it could be looked at again, they come for half a day. If they could spend some time in another area, or perhaps even two areas for an hour, that would help the elderly residents that use it. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, just to respond to that, the first part about the repairs, obviously, the report outlines that the purpose of the contingency fund is to pick up, trustees can apply for that fund for any, sort of unforeseen, things that might happen, as you said, regarding boilers, etc. With response to the mobile service, we did put that in Barwell. As following a period of consultation. At the moment, mobile library services are still sort of suspended, but we are looking at whether we, over the short term, certainly look at extending the Click and Connect service so that we know if people want supplies of books, we can provide them around the county. Not quite like a home library service, but very similar. So we're looking at our options for that, but we can certainly go away and have a look at that in Barwell in terms of sort of its positioning.
Mr. Poland.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Nigel, for the presentation. Just got a couple of questions, really. First of all, around community libraries, in terms of the insurance for the LCC books, the LCC equipment and so forth, is that something that we would cover sort of corporately, or is that something that each individual community library would have to insure themselves? That's the first question. And then and linked to that, actually, is there anything else that we would charge them for other than the peppercorn rate, the rent? I'm just thinking, is there any sort of scope there to help them out financially in the next sort of this year, coming years? And the second question about the click and collect library service is it seems really, as I understand, to have been quite popular. Just wanted a bit of information on that. Is the click and collect whereby if I go online, I find a book I like, and then I click it and then can go down and collect it at some point, even if it's a book that might not be normally at my local library, it might be at a library elsewhere in the county. Is that the facility, or is it literally just getting what would otherwise ordinarily be at the local library, if you see what I mean? And if that's not the case, could that be something that is looked at in the future? And just finally for me, is there any, if it's been as popular as I understand, is there any proposals to sort of keep it as a permanent feature? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for those questions, Mr. Poland. Just in terms of the book fund, the supply of books and IT, that comes as part of the support package, so they don't have to pay for that. The book stock remains the county property, and we effectively loaned them that book stock. We did that purely because the economies of scale make it much simpler for us to procure book supply services and distribute them out to libraries. It would make things too complicated for them to source their own, although many libraries do have sort of, honesty swaps and book swaps and so forth. In terms of other charges, no, the peppercorn rent is part of the what we would charge. They can buy into what we call soft facilities management, so they could buy a package from the county council in terms of facilities management, but they don't have to. Remember, they are independent sort of charities, and they can procure their own services, or deal with part of that through volunteering. In terms of the click and connect, not quite as you've described it. Basically, what you would do is you would ring the library, say you wanted a collection of books. Library staff or volunteers would put those books together, and then you would arrange a time just to go and pick up those books. So the request service, where you're looking at individual titles, you would do that online anyway. But what this does is it gives people a collection of books that perhaps don't want to use our online services. And we found actually that many people have actually really enjoyed having books that have been chosen for them, because it's introduced them to books that they might not have tried in the past and opened up their sort of like reading avenues in a way. Certainly something that we may look at in terms of what that offer might be. Clearly, we're not in a position where everybody can come back into the library, because of the pandemic and the controls in place. So that limits the amount of people that can come in. So it would certainly, be something that we might look at as a different offer in terms of that.
So that covered all your questions, James. Right, brilliant, Mr. Harrison.
Yes,
thank you. Thank you. Want to come back? Hold on, Dan.
No, I was only going to thank you for the answers. So
right. Thank you. Right.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your report, Nigel. It was very, very thin, but very well targeted. So I understood it very quickly where you're coming from. My point is simply this, that I was really impressed with the observations of Measham Library. And my request today is, could we send out advice along the lines of Measham and add more ideas to develop as a standard pack? Because clearly people, it's motivational, the ideas are very good, it's sort of bordering on a little bit of marketing, but it really is about the community, and I think that was excellent. So if that could be something as a standard, I think that would be excellent. Thank you.
Does that refer, Mr. Harrison, to the work that Measham are doing in terms of good practice? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. It might be worth saying that the trustees group meet as clusters to share good practice with each other, and that as again is supported by our own officers, and there are sort of bulletins that are issued to community managed libraries, so it enables people to share that good practice, and they do obviously clearly talk to each other about oh, we've noticed you've been doing this, how have you gone about doing that, and that's progressed really well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I don't see any further hands up, so I'll sneak in with one of my own. Nigel, just if I may, on paragraph 32, we know that there are 10 of the community libraries that have got a life expectancy of less than 20 years. And I know we will get further reports on this over the next, well, probably every year going forward. Is this something we could do, particularly as there may be available buildings coming up due to COVID crisis, to use our services to assist libraries, not paying for it, obviously, to perhaps look for alternative premises over the next 12, 18 months, so that they might be in a position to move earlier rather than later, because it may be there is a window of opportunity here that COVID may have caused?
Certainly, there's nothing to stop libraries moving. Castle Donington, for example, is case in point, which enabled us to sell the old building because they moved into other premises, which I think we're sharing with the parish council. There's nothing to say that we wouldn't consider or look at that. It depends very much on clearly what the trustees want to do in terms of that. But we try and be as open-minded as we can and look for any opportunities, particularly if we know that there may be financial issues that this could provide a solution for. So certainly worth noting.
I was thinking just slightly more of being slightly more proactive and perhaps putting it on their agenda if they may not have thought about themselves. They may not perhaps perceive there might be an opportunity now. So I just wonder if the officers we have that assist with them might just make those proactive suggestions about now might be a good time to actually start looking around and thinking about it, because opportunities may come up. Yep. That was where I was coming from, really.
Okay, so just some more proactive action around the potential for that. Yeah.
Right. Thank you for that, Nigel. I know that I've always viewed this as a great success. The libraries going to community. It's a difficult time for all. I'm pleased to see that we have still a healthy contingency fund in place, and we are providing that additional support. And I think you can tell from the questions that all members value these reports and updates on the situation, because they are, an integral part of our communities that we all care about. So we note the report, Nigel, and look forward to the next one in due course. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Chair.
We now move on to agenda item 13. Which is the performance report for Q1 2021, April to June, and year end 1920, which is pages 81 to 94 of the agenda pack. And is, I think people might still have their microphones on, and is with Matt Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. This is the regular report covering adults and communities performance, which today focus primarily on the first 3 months of 2020-21. That is the period April to June. However, it also reflects on the performance during 2019-20, which would have ordinarily been presented to the June meeting of the committee. A new approach to reporting the national adult social care performance was taken 2 years ago, with targets set for 3 years, 2018-19 through to 2020-21. The aim of these targets is to be in the top 25% of councils nationally, or above the average of shire authorities. For the previous 2 years, milestones were agreed on the path towards this 3-year target, and for 2020-21, it is against this final third-year target that performance in the report has been RAG rated. The appendix of the report summarises performance, including that of 2019-20. For that year, 21 metrics were compared to a milestone or a target, for which 19 were met and 2 fell short. Areas of good performance during the year 2019-20 included the number of hours of volunteering at libraries and heritage sites, library issues, the number of people not requiring ongoing long-term services following reablement, the low number of younger adults placed in permanent residential or nursing care, and finally, the high proportion of carers in receipt of a personal budget or a direct payment. The 2 areas where performance missed the target were heritage visits, although it's worth noting that sites closed in early March due to the outbreak of COVID-19. And finally, the number of people aged 65 or over who were placed into permanent care, either residential or nursing. Looking at more up-to-date performance, that which relates to the first quarter of this year, 2020-21, we can see notable effects of the outbreak of COVID-19. The most obvious of these include the lack of physical attendances at heritage sites and libraries, which were closed due to lockdown. Looking at performance from a different angle, however, it's worth noting that e-loans of library books increased considerably during April to June. There were 187,000 in the 3 months of that period, compared to an average 3 months last year of just 34,500. And within heritage services, home learning, resources and a virtual medieval festival are just a couple of examples of how services have adapted to the circumstances. Turning our attention to adult social care, there are certain national metrics where performance has been affected by COVID-19, whilst others show less, if any, impact. One area of high performance already mentioned from last year is the proportion of people requiring no ongoing services following reablement. At the end of 2019-20, performance was high at 87%, but has fallen to 80% in the early part of 2020-21. This is due in part to lower numbers of people with higher needs following their hospital discharge. Another area of performance where activity has been somewhat impacted by COVID-19 is the number of people aged 65 or over placed permanently into residential or nursing care. It's already been highlighted how this was higher than wished in 2019-20 and not on target. During the first 3 months of this year, however, there have been 160 admissions, which gives an estimate for the full year of 540 and well within target. Finally, it's worth noting the 4 metrics relating to personal budgets and direct payments. Due to the performance published at a national level, targets are extremely high for this year, 100% in some cases. As such, performance on some of these metrics is shown as currently being off target. Nevertheless, the proportions are still very high. We have 98% and 100% for carers' direct payments and personal budgets, respectively. And the 2 equivalent figures for service users are 47% and 96%. The latter of these 2, the 96%, that is, personal budgets for service users, is the most challenging of targets. In conclusion then, performance during 2019-20 was excellent, with 90% of metrics meeting the target. It's a mixed picture for the start of 2020-21, as can be expected. It's worth noting, however, that it's also relatively early in the year, and ongoing monitoring will continue for all metrics through 2020-21. So thank you, Chair. We welcome any questions or comments from members of the committee.
You're on mute, Mr. Richardson. Sorry.
Oh, it's right. It's me on mute. Sorry, there are no hands up, so I take it no one wishes to speak. I'm incompetent chairman. I know I'll have to be replaced. I think we discussed this in chairman's briefing, Matt, and it was one of those strange things that we just felt that it's such a difficult year going forward. In view of the first report we had today on COVID-19, that in some ways the target has become almost meaningless going forward, and that we'll have to have a greater look as we start to get through this in greater detail. So I think the committee welcomed the comments made from for last year. And certainly we note the ones for the first quarter, but in view of where we are, it just makes it almost impossible to comment fully on this without adequate information. So we thank you for the report, but I think there are still no questions. So I think we'll move on now. So thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
We're now moving on to agenda item 14, which is the Leicestershire and Rutland Safeguarding Adults Board Annual Report 2019-20, Strategic Plan 2020-25, and Business Plan 2020-21. And this is going to be presented by Fran Pearson, who is the independent chair of the Leicestershire and Rutland Local Safeguarding Adults Board. So welcome, Fran, if you're there.
I've just been in touch with her. She is just joining, so I'm just waiting to be able to admit her into the meeting. So sorry, apologies, just one moment. Okay, are you there, Fran?
I am. Hello.
Hello.
Right, thank you, Fran. This is Terry Richardson, chairman of the committee. I've just given you a very big introduction. So without further ado, we'll pass straight over to you.
That's lovely. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come in front of you this morning and share the annual report. I wanted to begin by saying this is my first full year chairing this partnership board for safeguarding adults. So when I had a similar visit with you last year, I was speaking about things in theory rather than actuality. So it's good to be able to speak about a year that I've been very much part of, and I've been very impressed by some of what I've seen. I make the point at the beginning of the report that the COVID pandemic, more than anything, underlined the importance of adult safeguarding. And looking at your whole agenda for much of this morning, I can see that adult safeguarding is a really relevant strand to a lot of what you've been considering. So I'd really welcome your views on this. In the cover report at section 10, we've set out some of the key messages. And I think we've talked about some of the assurance we've sought, some of the groups of people we're most concerned about. And I would just add to that we've worked really hard over the year to engage with colleagues who represent prisons as well, because adult safeguarding in prisons is really important. And I think the cover report finishes with a reference to the Community Safety Partnership. I think if we really are going to achieve all we need to achieve, it needs to be very much with a sense of coordination and shared purpose across the relevant strategic partnerships. And that's very much on my to-do list for the coming year. We've made big progress, and I've been made extremely welcome at things like the Strategic Partnership Board. But I think that's another stage of work that hopefully we can take forward. This year, Department for Health and Social Care gave Safeguarding Adults Boards dispensation either to delay their report publication because of COVID or to present a very partial report. I'm really pleased to say, because of the very good support I get from the business unit, this is neither late nor partial. So I'd very much welcome your comments about how we can present this report, what we might do with it in future years. And I've got colleagues here, John Wilson and James Fox, who can probably answer some of your more detailed questions if you have any. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Fran. I'll open it up to members for questions. I think you stunned them into silence, Fran. I've got no hands up at all. I think when we discussed this in the initial one, again, we welcome the report. We welcome. I think you hit the nail firmly on the head right at the start when you said our concern about safeguarding. One of the things this committee has always been concerned about is safeguarding, and in fact, during our the chairman's briefing, one of the things we did talk to the director about, John Wilson, was to ensure that throughout the ongoing COVID period, this committee is kept up to date with any safeguarding issues, which John truly highlighted in the COVID-19 report, which was the first report today. So we're certainly well aware of that. But we now have a hand that's flown up, so we go straight over without any further ado to Mrs. Maggie Wright. Maggie?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, jolly good. Thank you. Sorry about that. it was very interesting, Fran, to hear and what you said about the principles outlined and the key messages in point 10. One thing I was picking up on was the understanding and the application of the Mental Capacity Act, which really seems to, floor quite a few people because of the complexity within the Act. And I'm just wondering, you said it requires sustained focus. Can you give us an idea of what sort of focus there is, what we're looking at going forward on this to try and make it a bit more, I would say, simple, but I know it's not simple because of the Act.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I think it's worth beginning by saying that some of the approaches to mental capacity have been, greatly influenced by the fact we've been waiting for new guidance around liberty protection safeguards, which is such a key linkage. And finally, after waiting, we got confirmation from the Department for Health and Social Care that that's going to be delayed. So we, sort of training programs were geared up, but nobody could quite go on it. So I think people have been not exactly torn, but they've been having to simultaneously prepare for, particularly hospitals and the local authority would have a massively increased role with this new arrangement. So they've been trying to prepare for that, simultaneously not letting practice standards slide. So I suppose in terms of sustained focus, I'd draw your attention, probably, I think I say it in my forward, it's about this kind of virtuous circle of multi-agency audit, analysing the findings of that, training, and using data from case reviews and bringing it all back to the board to kind of triangulate it. And we have very much said as the board over time that we want to make sure that we have a balance between quantitative and qualitative data. And I think part of the answer to that lies in the board receiving a bit more qualitative data about mental capacity, in addition to the quantitative data that we already receive. And I think you'll have seen also we're moving to a series of spotlights around different topics. And I think one of the things as a board we can do as part of that is have a kind of thread running through it about, was mental capacity an issue here, and what has been done about it. So hopefully that's the kind of programme for the year ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Fran. Any further questions from members? It looks like you've done such a fine job of the report, Fran. I wouldn't take this as a negative. I've never known this committee to be backward in coming forward, if that makes sense. So the fact that they haven't got a tome of questions means that your report has comprehensively answered them. And I think you've just seen from the last question, we do have people that read the relevant acts, etc. So we do have expertise in the team. So thank you very much for the report, which we note. And we obviously look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you.
We now move on to the final item on today's agenda, which is the Annual Adult Social Care Complaints and Compliments Report 2019-20, which is pages 129 to 150, and is with Simon Parsons. Welcome, Simon. Hopefully.
Apologies again. He's just joining. Sorry, right. We're a bit ahead of time, so.
We run a tight ship here at Adults and Communities.
Okay, Simon, I think you've joined the meeting now.
Welcome, Simon.
Good morning, Chair.
You've had the big build up, Simon, so it's up to you not to disappoint us.
I'll do my best. Okay, so this report is on all adult social care complaints received and responded to within the 2019-20 financial year. So I guess the starting point to say is that we saw a 12% increase in complaints, and really that mirrors the kind of wider position both locally across all complaint types and probably the national picture. So levels of fault remained pretty static, same as last year, sort of 44% finding of fault upheld. So really that's remained fairly unchanged for the last couple of years, really. To put it in the context of the wider demand, so 194 complaints received, and that really equates to, if you look at the number of service users in receipt of long-term social care, which is the indicator we provide context with, it works out about 2% of the overall volume there. So just to give a viewpoint on that. In terms of complaints that escalated up to the local government and social care ombudsman, so they opened inquiries on 15 cases last year, so that's about 8% of the complaint type, so quite low levels in terms of escalation rates that the ombudsman then looked at, and lower than last year, importantly. And they made decisions on 10 cases during the year, again down by 3 from the year before. Importantly, fewer cases of fault found as well this year, in just 3 instances, as detailed on pages 147 to 148 of your papers. One of the learning points from last year, as members may remember, was that we introduced an additional step in the process, a kind of review step, and really that was drawing on learning from an ombudsman case in the 2018-19 year, where on reflection the council's internal response was probably not as robust as it could have been. So we introduced this additional step into the process, and that may well be a factor in the reduced numbers of maladministration findings from the ombudsman. Too early to conclusively say that, but it certainly will help in terms of that, ensuring that the robust responses have been done at the local resolution stage. The area where it will, of course, have had an impact is on timeliness of responding, because by very nature of adding a step in, that process of exhausting local resolution will of course take a bit longer, and that's really the main reason that you will have seen a reduction in complaints responded to at the 10 working day indicator through the year. So that reduced down to 39% from last year, but really a big factor in that is, as I say, is this additional review step. The committee last year requested some additional information around response timeframes, and really that was because we had no real indicator between 20 working days and the statutory maximum of 65 working days. So members will note an additional indicator at the 40 working day area, which just helps have a look at what's going on in that area, and that provides further reassurance that that complaint responses are being dealt with in a timely fashion, with 93% or 174 of the complaints dealt with within the 40 working day threshold, and just 4 complaints that exceeded the statutory maximum this year. So very much the outliers there. Tends to be with the ones that exceed the statutory maximum tend to be very much those where meetings are being arranged with families, and obviously that has implications in terms of timescales and that sort of thing. So nothing that I would flag as a concern in terms of timeliness there. Again, at the request of members last year, within the report this year, we've added some additional segmentation at a district level. That's still quite a manual process at the moment to deliver that, so it hasn't been backdated for the full year, so it came on stream for the second 6 months of the year, but obviously in future years we'll start to build that picture up now, and be able to spot any specific trends. Probably too early to draw anything conclusive from the data at the moment, but really just to advise members that will start appearing and being able to be compared with, I guess, in future reports there. The report also captures compliments, with 99 being recorded over the year. Always important that those are looked at as well, to bring balance to where things are going well. Very slight reduction on the previous year, but always hard to conclusively say we're capturing everything there. Although obviously we remind teams to ensure that those are forwarded on, but hard to say conclusively that's everything. But still a good number coming through there that represents the good work. In terms of what we're seeing in terms of the complaints and what they were about, probably the biggest changes that I just draw attention to were probably an increase in residential care complaints. It's the first time that we've actually seen more of those than home care related complaints, which always has traditionally been slightly higher. So, and indeed, residential care complaints featured in 2 of the 3 ombudsman decisions as well, really around that. So. Again, I've highlighted to the director and his team around an area just to look at, and in particular a couple of areas where providers' responses were perhaps not as robust as we would have liked, and the importance of that, because ultimately, although the providers may do the responses, we remain liable and responsible for the quality of complaints handling within that area. So probably a little bit of work that we can still do on working with providers around the quality of that area. And the other area that really came through as an area of where further work's needed is to tighten the quality of responses post safeguarding investigations and that interface in terms of complaints. So very often, if a safeguarding investigation is taking place, the complaints team will cease their work at that point and allow that to continue. But I guess some of the complaints intelligence has exposed gaps in perhaps that join there that we just need to close through. So that was probably the other area. The area of positive to highlight in terms of changes is reduction around direct payments complaints. That was one that a particular feature in last year's report, really all about the quality of information and guidance that was available. And I know a lot of work went on in terms of improving that, and that's starting to emerge through complaints intelligence. So a good example of where we've drawn the learning from the previous years and applied that. I think those are the main messages to run through, but very happy to take any questions on detail within the report.
All right, thank you, Simon, and thank you again for incorporating the requests of this committee in terms of the between 20 and 40 days and the breakdown by district. I think it's very much appreciated by members that they ask for these things, and you've made sure they've been put in place. Do I have any questions from members? They're all still awake, Simon, because I can see them on the screen. But oh, Mrs. Wright. Sorry, I can't get my hand to go quick enough. Am I off mute? The main part of the complaints, as we said, that you've highlighted, comes from the assessment and the care planning part of it, which is, and I assume that includes the assessments done at home and assessments done in hospital as well. Is that correct?
Yes, it would.
Yeah.
Any assessments carried out, and really the conclusion around what support is needed or otherwise. Yeah. So it would include assessments in all the settings. Yeah. Correct.
So going forward, it will be interesting to see how that's affected with the move that we've talked about earlier on today, with the moves of the assessment being moved away from hospital discharge to be done at home. And I'm wondering if we could capture that in the future to see if it has made any substantial difference.
I can certainly have a look into that and see how feasible that is. I'll certainly take that away to investigate further.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, I don't think there are any further questions, so thank you for that, Nigel. Sorry, Simon. I'm losing the plot here today. Right, so that concludes all the reports. The date of the next meeting is scheduled to take place on the 2nd of November 2020 at 2 p.m. There are no urgent items, and therefore thank you all very much for attending today and for your contributions, and I declare the meeting closed.
Thank you, Chairman.